Katonona has a supplementary.
When you, Mr. John, when you mentioned Aboriginal kids, there's a question we still haven't got the answer. I'm saying got because I received an email from a previous witness, Mrs. Roy. You remember she had accepted to look into the application of C-15 to adolescents. And so she's sending me an answer, quite a coincidence right now. Of course I will do that. But you mentioned that, and she is basically saying that because of the harshness of C-15, she does not think, if you read the adolescent-specific system, preamble and specific section, it would not apply to them. Do you have that?
Well, that entirely depends on the discretion at the front end, doesn't it?
Well, well, I hate to argue with someone who's not around and we don't have the text, but it's the question of nonviolent crimes. Mm-hmm. And if it's nonviolent crime, C-15 will not apply.
Okay.
Of course, someone can argue that C-15 is dealing with violent crimes.
Yes.
That's the minister said that.
Yes.
Well, we heard all kinds of witnesses saying the contrary.
Yes.
So that's why I'm asking you the question.
Yes. Thank you, Senator. Look, we have a natural experiment to our south. Nobody has perfected mandatory minimum sentences like the United States. But the effect is not what they anticipated. The effect is a net widening. They, too, initially targeted kingpins and high-level drug dealers. But those people are particularly hard to get. They consume a lot of police resources, they hire the best legal talent, and they get off. What happens, however, is that the net widens, and as these mandatory sentences take hold, more and more low-level offenders get scooped up. That has been the experience in the United States. I have seen nobody come forward to suggest that we in Canada can do it better and not replicate the mistake in the United States.
Well, to be fair to one of the witnesses who was defending mandatory minimum, Mr. Placas, who said in the U.S., it worked because they stay in prison long enough. When they come out, there's no intention from them. They're too old.
Oh, well, that's got to be good news.
I'm honest for the witness. He said that.
They spend their best years in prison. Therefore, mandatory minimum sentences work.
That's basically is that. And you referred to Mr. Placas in your introduction, so that's why I'm.
Yeah. Well, this is the argument for incapacitation, right? If we keep people in prison long enough, they mature out of their criminal tendencies.
Okay.
Okay. But what is the consequence? What are the social consequences of taking those people away from their families and communities? In the United States, and particularly in Florida, where this research was first done, they discovered that in certain neighborhoods that had excessively high rates of incarceration, crime didn't go down, it went up. So this whole structure of mandatory minimum sentences as crime reducing is false. It's false according to the evidence.
Thank you. Excusez-moi.
Are you referring to a specific study, and if so, could you provide us later with the reference to
I
it?
think we have
Happily.
that, Madam Chair.
On the Florida neighborhood?
John Jay's College for Advanced Journalism.
Okay, then we've got it. Thank you very much. Senator Wallace?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, and Mr. Jones. I want to just make sure I'm clear on this. You made a statement that drug prohibition cannot work. That term, drug prohibition, I just want to make sure I understand what you mean by that. Do you see drug prohibition as being the use of the criminal code, and incarceration obviously is one of the consequences of that, as a tool or as a means of dealing with, in this case, production, trafficking of drugs? Is that what you're saying, the prohibition, the use of the criminal code sanctions doesn't work and has no place in dealing with drug production and drug trafficking?
Let me put a little history around this. In 1908, a decision was made by the Parliament of Canada to respond to the use of drugs by the way, by a certain minority community in British Columbia, with the use of punishment and incarceration. That is the template for our current laws today, right up to the present day. We respond to drug use, trafficking, etc., with punishment first. That is drug prohibition. It is analogous to, it is identical to the use of prohibition for alcohol. The criminal justice system is the first response to the consumption, possession, trafficking of alcohol. That's why I use the word prohibition, because drug prohibition is indistinguishable from alcohol prohibition, except that alcohol prohibition didn't last, and drug prohibition is entering its second century.
We've had other witnesses who have said things similar to what you've just said, but again, are you suggesting, or is it your position, that we should not have criminal sanctions for the production, trafficking, importation, exportation of drugs, but rather it should be dealt in a regulatory manner similar to tobacco and alcohol? Is that what you're saying? The criminal code should not be involved in the issues that C-15 is attempting to deal with?
That is exactly what I'm saying.
Okay.
I want to make it clear here.
Okay.
I want to make it clear that we have inherited a system of regulation of illicit drugs. Regulation, Senator.
Yes.
Just another word for management.
Right.
That consists of delegating the production, distribution, and consumption of illicit drugs over to the contest between cops and organized crime, and we say, you guys fight it out. That is the most absurd system of regulation that we could have devised. It has brought us to the point today, Senator, where illicit drugs are cheaper, more widely available, and of better purity than they were even 40 years ago. Do you know that when Nixon declared his war on drugs in the United States, the average hit of heroin that he was concerned about was down around the level of 5% purity. Today, in Washington, D.C., a dose of heroin is up to 50% purity. That's prohibition.
I think probably the objective has been, through prohibition, through criminalization of drug production and drug trafficking, has been to attempt to provide protection to people in our society who would not otherwise be involved with drugs. In other words, I guess I'll leave that at that. I mean, it's to protect. I know a lot of the focus in this is on those that are involved in the drug trade and that are incarcerated, but the real objective here is to protect the public and to try to prevent as many of the public, in particular youth, from being drawn into drug issues. But would you not agree, if prohibition, if the criminal code were no longer used as a tool in attempting to deal with drug trafficking and drug production, that it would lead to an increase of drug use in our society? If that's the case, how could that possibly be beneficial?
I do not agree with that.
Okay.
I think that assertion is made routinely without any evidence that there's any truth for it. You are going to hear, I believe tomorrow or the next day, from Glenn Greenwald, who is going to tell you about the situation in Portugal. You ask him if that situation has applied there, because they have decriminalized everything across the board. And the most interesting outcome from a public health standpoint is an upward spike in demand for treatment. And suddenly they have all these resources to put into treatment because they've taken them out of enforcement.
Interesting when you use Portugal as an example. We've also heard the example of Sweden, where the enforcement, the tougher means of enforcement has been used, together with more funding being applied to treatment, and they found that to result in great improvement. So there's many lessons to be learned.
Senator, that's referred to as the Swedish myth. I think you have to go and see how many other ways drug problems manifest themselves in Sweden that don't make it into the popular mythology.
Is there anything called the Portuguese myth, or is it only the
Well,
Swedish?
I think that's a good question for Glenn Greenwald.